Hello and a very warm welcome back to the garden. I know that there's a lot of you that watch this channel who have really small spaces, and when you have small spaces I keep hearing about, and I completely understand it, not wanting to put in a compost bin because it takes up valuable growing space, and so then you're kind of forced to buy compost instead. And perhaps the easiest thing to do is have a worm bin, but that requires a little bit more care and attention. Now, I almost do agree with that. However, I thought every garden has some kind of pathway. What if we relook at how we use our pathways in small spaces to bring more than just the benefit of going around the garden? So originally I thought about doing this experiment using the pathways on this lower part of the garden, but then I felt if you've got a small space, these pathways are a little bit too big and isn't going to be a fair representation. But at the top part of the garden we've got a row of raised beds which have a much narrower pathway, and I thought this will be a little bit more of a fair experiment to carry out. So my theory was, if I treated a path like a long linear compost bin and didn't worry about the volume or about hot composting, and instead thought about it a bit like a lasagna, adding on different layers with something carbon on the base like wood chip or a load of branches or some straw, and just add roughly 50-50 of greens and browns, and just keep on building it, keep on turning it, still use it as a path, walking over, the walking would turn it, and kind of see what happens. And so 10 months ago I created the first ever compost pathway, and now 10 months later I've got some of the nicest compost I think I've ever made. And we finished filling this around 5 or 6 months ago, just left it to do its thing, and it's turned out really well. So these beds are made out of chemically inert plastic, so I'm not worried about the beds rotting. If you're using wooden beds, a real simple way, or a simple workaround, is just to line the outside of the beds with some old compost bags or something similar, just to help protect the wood a bit. But then what happened is that any time when I was just kind of like going around and weeding the beds and everything, or if I got some prunings, I would just add the odd bucket full of material over the growing season, and so the volume built up. We probably turned it around 3 to 4 times and just didn't really think much about it, left it over winter, and now here we are in spring with such a lovely consistency of compost. Yes, there's a few kind of rough bits in there, you know, I've got some old twigs and things that are still breaking down, but this is perfectly acceptable to use as a compost to mulch on my raised beds, or if I wanted to I could run it through a sieve and I could use it for potting seedlings as well. I think the main thing that I want you to get from this video is that it is very much a hands-off process. You, apart from the odd bit of kind of forking over, you just leave it alone, you do its thing, you still use it as a path, and you kind of magically get some compost later on. Now, one little tip is, if you do have a lot of dry conditions, there might be an occasional time where you just need to give it a bit of a soaking to add a little bit of moisture. But all in all, I have found this so easy, and now I need to actually work out how much compost has been produced in this pathway. It's important to note, for this garden we've got a dedicated compost area behind this trellis, so for your garden all of your material could be going to your compost pathway, and so you could be making even more. For me that was just the odd bucket here and there, but if you're putting all of your kitchen waste etc, there's a huge amount of potential. And so to do that I'm going to see how many of these potato tubs, which are 30 litres, I can fill using the compost and the material in the compost pathway. So all of these buckets are filled now with compost, and it is a lot. If you think about each bucket being 30 litres of compost, we've got 11 buckets here. That's 330 litres of compost that we've made. I reckon there's probably an extra, I don't know, 20 if I really wanted to scrape out the dregs, but that's a huge volume of compost to produce from a pathway that is 3 meters wide. It was also very satisfying and very easy to just scoop up all of the material and put it in the buckets. Now, if you want a very easy calculation to work out how much compost you need for mulching your beds, if we stick with a 3 centimeter depth, quite a nice decent depth, which is just over an inch deep, 30 litres of compost covers a square metre of soil with a 3 centimetre deep mulch. That means with these buckets we can mulch 11 square metres of growing space, and if you included all of the extra bits and maybe dropped it down to 2.5 centimetre, a 1 inch mulch, then you could easily mulch 3 raised beds of this size, 3 by 1.2 metres, with compost from a single pathway. So this space here can mulch this bed, that bed, and the other bed behind it if you're growing for intensive annuals. And I think that's very empowering. And it's my hope that anyone with a small garden can now start to produce their own compost and become more resilient with it. So if you want to look at my concept video that I made last year about the idea and starting to put it into practice, and compare my theory of how much volume of compost I might have produced, watch the video here, because it might be quite interesting to see if the numbers stack up or they don't, or if it outperformed.